All right, what's up, everybody? Back again today for part 2 of learning Python on AWS. Yesterday, we left off. I think we got through all the way through module 7 here, which was arguments and parameters. And we were just about to pick up on inputs, but the stream was running a little long yesterday, so decided to pick it up again today and keep going through each of these modules here and learn a little bit more Python on AWS. So let's see here. So I still have up here in the top right, we have the workshop itself. I'm still gonna try and this next one is inputs, and then I still have the same IDE Cloud9 instance here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and exit out of that. Yeah, so let's just dive in and cover some inputs. So inputs, how to assign values to variables, define a function, inputs, pass positional arguments to parameters in the function, inputs pass keyword arguments to parameters in a function, pass key value pairs as arguments to a parameter in a function. So it says, so far, all the values we've defined have been written into the program. Ideally, we want to be able to pass information to the program from external sources and pass information between functions and to other programs. Okay. So lab 5. In this lab, we're going to look at different ways of passing information to our program as inputs from external sources. All right, step 1, user input from the console. So in our Amazon Translate example, we have provided the values directly in the code. What if we want to provide the values as a user input at the time we run the program? That looks pretty familiar. So let me just open. Let's open that back up. So the input function, to pass input from our function, we run Python, but we still need to use a built-in function called input. This will prompt the user with a message, and then they have to wait for them to provide an input. So modify the program to accept user input. Okay. Just gonna move this down a little bit. So it looks like we can just edit this line and say text equals input oops provide the text you want translating. And then source code or source language code. Equals input. Provide the 2-letter source code, source language code. Target so now we have to update when we call that function down here with the parameters. Alright, so if we save that and then let's try to run it. Oops, Python translate py should be prompted now with user input. So I am learning to code in AWS. English, French. Boom. We get the output here. What did we do? What did we do? We define a variable for each of the required inputs. We use the input function to provide a prompt for user input. We use the variables as keyword inputs in to our function. Cool. Yeah, so this would be like user input, right? I think this is useful, like using user input in this way has added additional flexibility and simplicity to the program, as our user is not having to edit the actual program to get a result. So next steps, we're going to look at how we can pass our arguments as inputs using parameters. I don't know what is actually worth making a note of. Maybe this little blurb here. Looks like something good to recall later, I guess. All right, CLI arguments. So in the previous step, we used the user input. This was useful for human input, but more often in AWS, we want to automate our workflow, which means we need a method of passing parameters via the CLI. So we go back to using quargs here. Okay. That's basically what we have now. So using arg parse to input arguments to the CLI. Python has a built-in argument parser called argparse, which links to some documentation, I'm guessing. The next section, but don't worry, it should be simple to figure out. Famous last words. Okay, so it looks like we need to import argparse too. So because it's built in, right? It's built in. We don't have to pip install like we did with Boto 3. So it looks like we need to define the parser variable to equal argparse.argument parser. Okay. So parser equals argparse dot argument parser description equals provides translation between one source language and another of the same set of languages. Parser, dot add argument. So single quotes, text. So it looks like we're specifying the arguments here. Am I missing something? I don't know why these are not. Keep going. The text, I'm just gonna copy this. It's a lot of typing. Did I put a comma at the end of this? Nope. Okay, I'm just gonna copy all this here. So we have to add the 2 additional arguments, but I typed the first one, so it should count. Oops. Seems like a lot to add for this, but okay. So now we just need to say args equals parser dot, I guess, right? We can get rid of this. And then within our main function, we need to, when we call translate.text, looks like we just need to add star star bars args. Oops. Okay, so then now on this command line, we can is this on the command line, here's where we pass in the values for those arguments, I guess. It's interesting that so if I come back here, oops, did I miss a, oh, it's weird. Went back to the previous page. Okay, so let's see here. Alright, so if we run this and then text oh, I see, we're specifying what that flag is here in the add argument method. Okay. It's different. I still don't know how to pronounce it. I think I need to get the what's the other AWS service that pronounces, I think it's called like Poly, Amazon Poly or something like that. So it can like, you can actually repeat like how to pronounce these words in French. So what did we do? We imported a Python package called argparse. We created an argument parser object which holds the information necessary to parse the command line into Python data types. Yep, the add argument method here. Cool. Nah, no thanks. So far, all of our inputs have been provided either by human interaction, with the command prompt or via human configuration at the command line. This is okay for small amounts of input, but what happens if we need to? That's true. Yeah. And the documentation shows that there's an optional mode that can be passed in. In this example below, we'll pass in R. This indicates that the file is open as read-only. To write to a file, we need to use W. To get input from an external file, we use the format with open file name R read only as variable name, do something with variable here. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'll make a new file. Let's call this translate with file.py. So we can create a new function called open input. We pass in a file with open file read only as f text equals f dot read. Text.txt. Cool. So then now, oh wait, do we need to add that to? Oh, okay. So I guess it's just reading text, or yeah, reading text from a text file, not really doing the translate or something. So that was kind of confusing, or a change of pace there. So if we name it text.txt, we'd say the quick brown fox. And then run this and say Python translate. Sweet. seems a little bit easier to read from like a text file or something. JSON. Yeah, this is it's probably going to be more of a common way to input data. So what is the JSON file format? I first learned about JSON when I started to learn how to write CloudFormation templates. So at the time, it was only CloudFormation only supported JSON templates. It was before they actually had support for YAML, which is a little bit easier to write and read. So pretty familiar with JSON. It's a lot of punctuation with curly brackets and commas and but anyways, so it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Also, it's pronounced JSON. It is very similar structure to Python dictionaries and lists, more so with dictionaries, but with only a few exceptions. It's a very common format for computer programs to exchange information in using APIs. Like, this output that we've been getting from, every time we've run the translate or, Amazon Translate service has been returning JSON. So. Okay, so when we convert Python to JSON, there's some conversion that takes place. The mapping is shown below. Before we use an external file, it's worth spending some time learning about JSON loads and JSON dumps. These two methods using JSON strings denoted by the S. When learning to manipulate JSON, it is easy to get confused between JSON loads and JSON load, or JSON dumps and JSON dump. Okay. Here is an easy way to know which to use. JSON load and JSON dump use input and output JSON from files and into files, from files and into files. JSON loads and JSON dumps use input and outputting JSON from strings into strings. I think that seems like something. I haven't really been taking notes, but that seems like a good thing to make a note of. Okay, so it looks like it's going to give us an example here. So I'm just going to close this one. So 3 quotes. And yeah, this is tricky because I think JSON's pretty picky about, tricky because it's picky about spacing, I think, like, but let's give this a try. So the input here, boy. So I think I'll put it here like it does in the example, but let's see if we can do this. Text. Thank God for an IDE, right? Like, helps with that spacing, you know, automatically. Lifesaver. But you can already kind of see, like, there's just like curly brackets everywhere and colons, and you know, it's just, it's a lot. Target language code, commas. But it is right, you know, you gotta get used to this stuff because it's very common. All right, I think that is our JSON string there, and then I'm just gonna copy this. Just wanted to see if I can correctly write it out like that. Okay, so the parameter should by now look familiar as our inputs to the translate service with the addition of an extra parameter. This is just an illustration and we will remove it in a moment. Okay. To run the program, enter. Okay. So it just returns like the JSON string. Okay. Python has mapped the original true to a valid value of true. This illustrates how the mapping between JSON and Python works. This format is not easy to read, but we can get Python to provide the same formatting of indentation as our original string that we passed in as a variable JSON string. To do this, we're going to use JSON dumps, but with an added parameter to format the string with indentation. That would be nice. So modify your code below to use JSON dumps instead. Okay. So within the main function here, JSON input, JSON loads, JSON string. We add indented format. And then we print out that instead. That looks nice. Yeah, it looks a lot better. Easier to read. Oh, in fact, it is easier to read. Look at that. Okay, so what we did? We defined a variable with a string. We used Python loads to load the string and convert it into JSON. Then we used JSON dumps to convert the string back to a valid Python data types. We added some formatting to make it easier to read. What Python did. I wonder if we added like why we used 2 for the indentation. I don't know what happens if we add 3, or let's be crazy and add 4. Interesting. Yeah, so it looks like it's 2 looks normal, I guess. All right, so navigating a JSON structure. Learning to navigate a JSON structure. Let's see. If you look at the structure above, you can see that it comprises a dictionary with a key of input and a value of a list containing another dictionary. This is called nesting. It is very common to have dictionaries which contain lists, which contain dictionaries, which we can see here. So a dictionary contains a list, which contains a dictionary. That's nesting. Okay, so modify your code as below. I'm gonna change. Oh, I guess we're getting rid of that anyways. So let's see here. So text equals JSON input. Gonna copy and paste this so I don't struggle through that again. Okay, and then now we just need to print it, I guess. Text, source code language, target language code. All right. Let's see what happens. Cool. So it gave us just the values of each of these keys, right? But it didn't give us true. Oh, because we didn't specify that. So what Python is doing is navigating the JSON structure first, because the JSON is in the variable JSON input. We use this as our first reference. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. You should now have a good idea about how Python is navigating the JSON structure so you can get to the information you want in the file. You may have noticed that the index value of 0 is not very flexible. What happens if the list contains more than one item in the list? In a later session or lesson, we are going to learn how to iterate over lists to make so that we can use repetition to make our code more flexible and scalable. JSON loads, JSON dumps to manipulate JSON strings, create a file with some JSON data that we will use for Amazon Translate service. So we can create a new file called translate input.json. I'll just copy this in. I guess we'll go ahead and just create a new file. What did they recommend? So importing arg parse, import JSON, import Boto3. Oops. I'm just gonna go ahead and copy and paste that in. We've already kind of been through, creating an argument parser, and then create this function which will open this translate input.json file. And then our translate text function to actually do the translation, then our main function, and then name equals main. All right, so that all looks good, I think. I guess, so once we run this on the command line, it'll ask us what the name of the file is. Yeah, okay. So we run this. Oh, I didn't pass it. Well, that's kind of good that. So I didn't pass it the file flag, but it's kind of nice where this error message will provide, this like, helper sort of notification here that says, the following arguments are required. So, and again, that's with us adding this add argument method and making it required. So file is translate input.json. Nice. Cool. First opens the file, the second is our translate function, the third is the main, which basically kicks them both off. Cool. Get used to JSON, that's for sure. Loops, nice. Let's add another. So in the previous section, we looked at different methods to input data into our program. In this section, we'll learn about loops. Loops are a way of iterating over data in a repeatable way. For example, in the last section, we navigated a JSON structure where the index value in a list was 0. If there are multiple items in a list, we can use a loop to repeat some of the action for each one. So instead of hard coding 0, we can iterate across the multiple indexes. So looping over lists in JSON. In this lab, we're going to learn the basics of using loops and extend our example of using translate to repeat the process of translating text stored in a JSON file. So the first step is to learn about simple loops using lists and the range as JSON. The third step is to learn about creating lists using list comprehension. So step 1, the simple loop. We're going to create a simple example in Python interactive environment to show how looping over a list works. So back to back to our original. I think we did that over here in the data types section in part 1. So So I'm actually gonna clear the screen here since we're gonna be going into the IPython environment. So first, if we, well, I need to get in there. And if we create a variable called fruit equals, and then we add apples, oranges, and bananas. So we've created a list in the variable fruit. Now we can say for item in fruit, print, and you'll notice once I hit enter here, it knows that this is supposed to be indented because we're inside of a for loop. So F, and then now we're using F strings. So it's all coming together here. The best fruit now is item so it'll loop through our fruit list and it didn't indent that. Okay, interesting. So apparently I have to add the indentation there, indentation. Thought it did it by default, but apparently not. So if we do that, and then I think if we, if you enter again, it'll exit the for loop. And now we're getting each of the elements of the list in printed out. So instead of like writing, a print statement for each of the elements in the list, the for loop allows us to iterate over that and print it out more efficiently. This looks like the same thing. It's just you're using integers instead. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, same concept here too. Like, this works if you already have like a list of elements in there, but this range function is pretty sweet. So you can just specify a number to go up to. So we can let's run that real quick. So for number in range 10, indentation, right? Another F string. The next number is number, and there's the output there we get, so same thing with for loops, right? That we start at index is 0. I'm sure it'll point that out here. So you can see that computers start counting at 0 as the first number. If you want to start counting at 1, you can use the range method. So you just add a 1 in front. So let's say 1. So it would be 1 to 10. Oh, it's up into 10, but does not include 10. if you want to increment the counter by more than the default value of 1, perhaps you wanted to only have odd numbers or even numbers. To do this, you can add a third parameter to the range function. Okay, cool. Oops, accidentally hit 0. Note, for this to work, the range method needs 3 parameters. So if you're starting at 0, you need to include it. Otherwise, it won't work. For example, range 0, 10 to works, but range 10 to will not. Okay. A note, good for notes here, I guess. What do they call this? Simple loops. Anything else worth noting? I don't think so, but all right. Moving on. Step 2. Looping over JSON. Let's see here. Okay, so looping over JSON, looping over dictionaries and JSON. As we looked in the input section, JSON is a common format used to exchange information between computers, programs, functions, and APIs. JSON shares lots of similarities with Python dictionary. If you need a reminder of the differences, review the input section of the workshop. Yeah, did that one yesterday, or we just did that one. Duh. It's on 8. In this section, we're going to look at common use case where our input data is a sequence of dictionaries inside of a list. In this section, you learned how to loop over a list. We can apply the same principle when the list comprises dictionaries. All right. So exit, clear. On file here. I'm just gonna update this, paste it in. Wanted to see if there's a way to update all of them at once, but anyways, so we'll stick with French. All right, so if we create a new file, let me just save that, exit that. All right, so loops.py. Looks like we bring in args parse again in JSON. So arg parse import JSON import put a 3. This looks familiar. Keeps reloading on me for some reason. Just gonna copy and paste this guy. Same concept, argument parser, add arguments. We're gonna pass it in this file name for the JSON file that we just created. And then this function looks familiar because it's gonna help us open the file. This is our translate function. Pretty similar so far. Okay, so here is our translate loop. So I'm going to type this one out just so I can, because this is what is new. So translate loop. Okay, so now we say for item in input text. We call our translate text function with item. So we are calling the open input, which opens the JSON file, and then for item in that file, we run our translate text function, or we call our translate text function. So therefore, since this basically kicks everything off, because we're calling the other two functions from translate loop. We only need to call that here. And then the good old if name. Curious to know if there's what this is like, if there's like a short name for it or something, like what it's actually called maybe. All right. So now it looks like we can run that again. Or run it for the first time. So Python loops.py, and then we need to pass it in a file name of translate input.json. And we get all of our French that I have no idea how to pronounce at all. Did it have what is cloud computing twice? Oh yeah, okay. I noticed there is this twice, so didn't know if that was actually two different inputs there, but looks like it is. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I can see this being like a very common example because, if you have a bunch of data in JSON, and being able to loop through or open the file. You have your sort of logic here of what you're trying to accomplish, and then being able to just like iterate across or over that and loop through the different data types or the different key values within the JSON file. That's that's the game right there, man. Basically recapping what we just did. The function translate loop contains a for loop which takes each dictionary item from the list and then calls the translate text function for the value stored in the variable item as a input parameter. Cool. So step 3 is list comprehensions. So far, our examples have provided a list of items to iterate over. What if we want to create a new list of data provided? For example, maybe we want to generate a list of just the text we want to translate. I can see that. You could do this using built-in Python method .append and a for loop. Okay, so add this function to your code in loops.py. Okay. Let's try and see what this is doing though. So new input text list. Input text equals open input new list equals, so this is an empty list, right? So I think I mentioned this in the part 1 of this workshop, but this is kind of what I'm familiar with, is having an empty list and then sort of using a for loop to append the list and just like add data to the list. So for item in input text equals item text new list dot append text. So I think this is just gonna go through the file again, and so it'd be like 2 copies of the same stuff, but we'll see. Oh, we gotta call it as well. It's interesting that it's first though, or above the translate loop. Alright, so I'm assuming we'll get the same thing but double what we see here. So let's run the same thing. Oh, guess not. Oh, right, because, yeah, it is the same thing, it's just not translated. So in the first part of it here, we can see that it's in English because it hasn't been translated at all. But it's interesting, it's showing up as in a list. But list comprehensions. So using a for loop to generate new lists using append is perfectly valid way of generating new lists. However, we can use a list comprehension to reduce this to a single line. And it combines the for loop and the creation of a list into a single line. That sounds pretty cool. I think I'm actually gonna say list comprehensions. Okay, so add a new list below. So I guess we can compare. So def new list comprehension. So we open the file and then list comprehension equals item text for item in input text. And then print certainly a few lines less than it, but so if we kind of like take a look here, so instead of like, you know, creating a empty list here, we're sort of you know doing that, but then like adding all of the logic like within the list. So item text for item in input text. So we add that. Yes, if we run it again and clear, run it again. Get the same output down here. So this is our translate loop. And then this is our list comprehension loop. Cool. Okay, so it's looks like it's gonna help us sort of break down the list comprehension here. So yeah, basically it does the same thing, but now it's in a single line. Although these look complex to start, you can break down the structure to make it easier to remember. So let me just get a full screen on that. So line 41 there. The list comprehension is assigned to a variable called list comprehension. Because it is creating a list, it is wrapped in the brackets. This replaces the line new list, right, which is the empty list. Yeah, that makes sense. The part after the first part defines what specific value we want to include in the list. So item bracket, text, which replaces text equals item text, which removes assigning it to a variable. So this part. Okay, yeah. So that this here in the for loop equals this. That's what we're trying to get anyways. The second part of the expression is the for loop. So it starts with for item in. Okay. So it's almost like the top part of the for loop goes to the end of the list comprehension. I mean, if it saves space, in one line, I think that's pretty good. So it's just, I think I originally learned Python with it being this way, iterating across something to fill in an empty list, but list comprehension looks like a more efficient way. Definitely, probably best practice by now to do it with a list comprehension instead. So, anyways, well, I think that's gonna wrap it for part 2 of the stream. I like to sort of keep it within an hour or hour and a half in the stream. So, learning something new for an hour and a half every day. It's kind of my goal with this whole thing. And so, today we were able to go through inputs and loops. Learned a lot with, args, parse, user inputs, the CLI input, and then, working with JSON, which is definitely something that, got to get used to for sure. And then working with loops, being more efficient to instead of hard coding which index you want, being able to iterate across, lists and dictionaries, and got to see, the benefits of list comprehensions. So looks like next up in part 3, we're going to go through if statements. So some more adding logic to the code. And we'll keep going through there. Looks like there's 4 steps in this, and keep chugging along. So thanks for watching. Doesn't look like anyone showed up to the live stream, which is fine, but if someone ends up watching this later, you can follow me on Twitter at TechSergeant _green. Hit me up on Twitter, and join the live streams in the future. I'm gonna try to stick to 4:30 Pacific time, and we'll keep learning. So thanks for watching. Bye.